Hello and welcome to the Sales Leaders series. I'm your host, Freddie, where I'll be gathering B2B SaaS sales leaders from across the world to answer 5 short, topical B2B SaaS sales questions. These questions are going to be the same each week, bar one, giving you insight and different perspectives into how top performers within the industry think, as well as actionable advice you guys can use in your own selling careers. Our guest this week is Jacob Walker. Jacob started his sales career as an SDR in 2016. After showing a knack for growing revenue, he quickly climbed the ranks towards managing a team of 8 sales professionals in his second outing. Jacob then moved to work as a sales leader at Rev.com, where he built their SDR org, account management team, and corporate and legal vertical from the ground up. Jacob now acts as head of sales at Occupier, an exciting scale-up shaking up the prop tech space. Aside from Occupier, Jacob is a community member in Pavilion and mentors several other sales leaders, both in Austin and across the US. Jacob, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Well, we're really excited to have you on. The way that this is going to work is I'm going to ask you 5 very short, simple questions, 4 of which everyone listening already knows. And then obviously the last one is a new one given to us by our previous guest. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Fantastic. We'll just go straight into it. So the first question is, when thinking about how you've grown revenue since 2016, plus obviously you're at Rev.com and now being Occupier, is there one thing that you would say, or maybe a couple ways of thinking or frameworks that you've used over those years that have made the difference to you and your teams in growing that revenue?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. So first things first, everything that I've learned from effectively what I call my board of directors. So that's a series of people that I have really close to me in my life that I trust and go to for advice. And I think it's really important to curate your board of directors and make sure that you have people strategically in those roles. So number one, it's like the friend, somebody who has nothing to do with B2B SaaS sales, somebody who you can just be really honest with and doesn't really have any skin in the game, so to speak. The second type of person that I have on my board is somebody who is where I want to be in 3 to 5 years. Somebody who's tactically kind of been there, done that, and can help me troubleshoot and honestly problem predict. The final person that I have on that board is typically kind of it's somebody who I want to who do you want to be when you grow up, kind of thing. Like somebody who's very aspirational, not as helpful tactically because it's been a long time since they've dealt with the same problem set, but they're where you want to be in terms of your life trajectory. So what I've learned from my board, Jacob's board of directors, is number one, build for scale. Build not just to solve problems today, but understand where does this process break in a year from now? Or, hey, if we had to double our output tomorrow, would this process or system work for that? Pulling that string a little bit more, if you did have to double your output, how would you do it? It's a question that I ask myself often, just because you can get a little complacent if something's working. You always need to be evolving. The final thing that I've learned from my board of directors is to focus on the inputs. If you can focus on mastery of the inputs and the execution of those inputs, the scoreboard almost always takes care of itself.
Makes sense. I guess going back to how you created, your board of directors.
Sure.
You started out as SDR and then obviously quickly moved up into management and heading up sales. At what point did you realize that you need these individuals around you, and how did you go about actually just contact them?
How did I go about doing it? Yeah, it's a good question. So I've always had the benefit of having great mentors in my life, just even from being a little kid, whether it was a sports team coach or a teacher or professor. I've always really gravitated toward having mentors in my life, and I've recognized the benefits of that early on. So even from my first SDR job at my first startup with Trendkite, my very first manager and I are still very, very close friends. He's absolutely on the board of directors. And if you add people to the board as you go. It's not, networking can be like a little weird to people. It's definitely a very useful skill is what I'll say. The relationships will come organically if you put yourself out there.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Yeah, great answer. Question 2. What is the biggest challenge your team is currently facing? And obviously looking into 2023 with everything going on with economic uncertainty, things like that, how are you looking to tackle that biggest challenge?
Yeah. So I'm still pretty early stage. We raised our Series A this year. And so I operate in a world where everything's important. You have to decide what's urgent. There's a lot that we could do. So really the space that we're in right now, it's a constant prioritization exercise, coupled with a flywheel of experimentation. So really what I try to do is I try to empower everybody to run rigorous experiments themselves and then report their findings to the team. That's my head of revenue operations, Grant, by the way, everybody. It really, at the end of the day, I'm in the people business. It's my job to help people learn, grow, and succeed. From an industry perspective, commercial real estate has been a little bit slower to adopt technology than other industries like sales tech stack, for example, or even residential real estate. So there's a lot of kind of legacy systems and antiquated process in the commercial real estate industry. So we're pretty early on the adopting curve as far as people buying and using technology to solve problems in the commercial real estate space.
So I guess with everything going on as well, I think in general, macroeconomically, there's a lot of uncertainty buying, software in general. I mean, how are you currently managing the less adoption of the prop tech space alongside those unfavorable economic conditions?
Yeah, absolutely. So really, it's about multi-threading early. From a tactical perspective, we're multi-threading earlier in our deals. We're getting CFOs, VPs of finance involved much earlier in our process. We are building on the value from an ROI perspective, whether that's like an ROI calculator or understanding how much Occupier can help you if you miss a critical date or a rent escalation. Those are real monetary penalties that have a value on a company's bottom line. So really trying to get as close to the bottom line impact as we can. Thankfully, we are a little bit more insulated as far as the industry that we sell to compared to a lot of other industries. So and again, we're still pretty early stage. So there's a lot of room to run. But it's about maximizing the focus on the return on investment somebody gets from an occupier.
Yeah, makes sense. Question 3. What do you think will be the most important factor, especially going into 2023, of success for B2B software sales, especially looking over the next year and then also looking over the next 5 years?
Cool. Yeah, I have a lot of interesting thoughts on this. I'm glad you asked this. So macro, there are a few things that I'm paying attention to in regards to B2B SaaS, particularly in early stage, which is the context that I live in. First, there's a pretty big shift in the VC world. There's a really interesting article that was actually written a couple of years ago by a guy named, I think his name, Alex Lazarov. I apologize, Alex, if I butchered your last name. In the Harvard Business Review, his main point is startups need to start thinking like camels, not unicorns. Build for the long haul and build to survive. I think the days where you can grow at all costs, throw bodies at a revenue goal that somebody came up with in an Excel spreadsheet with Excel magic and then lay a bunch of people off, those days are gone. I think you have to really focus on how do we execute the capacity-based growth model. And then once you have everything figured out from an operational and process perspective, then you can scale your sales team exponentially. So that's macro. At a VC level, I think people are a lot more interested in tightening up things like unit economics earlier on than they have been previously. On the tactical level, there's a lot of innovation in the way products go to market that align with the way that B2B buyers want to buy. Things like AI for the top of the funnel, product-led growth, where does sales fit into that, assisted motion? Those are things that I'm thinking about. I think sales leaders who aren't thinking about how to blend those things together with human-based relationships that are going to be left behind. I mean, at the end of the day, relationships matter. That's not going anywhere. That said, we need to align with the way that our customers want to buy. I think I don't necessarily think it's an either or. I think it's a yes and whoever can find that right blend for their buyer's context is going to be successful over the long haul.
That makes sense. I mean, I was speaking to a sales leader, I think it was the last episode, and we were talking about using AI to build that context and that real personalization, but not just obviously, hi, Jacob, I can see you work at Occupier, but it's not personalized. Yeah, that's personalized, but it's not context there. There's no real meaning to why I'm reaching out to you. So utilizing those technologies to be able to do that at scale, but also quickly is going to be really important for cutting through the noise, right? Especially in great. I think that's
one of the things that I'll add to that. Oh, sorry to cut you off. One of the things that I'll add to that is everybody and their mother is an intent data company these days. I think that's kind of like the sexy in vogue thing in sales tech right now. I have yet to meet a tool or a platform that's a silver bullet. Oh my gosh, this is going to cure all my problems. I think you have to be really intentional about the way that you blend the use of your tech stack. So for example, we are currently utilizing first-party intent data rather than like jumping toward a third-party intent data tool because, I mean, to be totally honest with you, Reddit, you don't stumble into a lease accounting demo is the way I like to describe it. Chances are, like, if you're researching lease accounting, you need lease accounting. So third-party intent data is interesting to a point, but it doesn't move the needle for us as much as you would think at first blush. So I think anybody who can again continue that experimentation process and fine tune things in their tech stack to be able to help put the right account in front of the right person at the right time is also going to be successful over the long haul. I mean, everybody kind of agrees spray and pray is dead. One of the questions that I ask myself as a North Star is how do I put the right person in front of the right account at the right time?
Yeah, and I think that's also especially apt for you guys and I guess companies that are before scaling, understanding what's actually working before building it out. Great answer. Question 4. Let's move on. Sales is a emotional career. Obviously, you've been in sales since 2016. And I can imagine there's been a lot of ups and downs, especially obviously going through COVID. 2020 was a pretty big shake-up. What's the biggest or what's been the toughest moment in your sales career to date? How did you tackle it? And based on what you went through, what advice would you give to people looking at your role and looking at the position, not necessarily to avoid that situation, but what advice would you give them to, I guess, better deal with the ups and downs in sales?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. At the end of the day, sales is buying is an emotional decision. And as such, sales is a very emotional game. Highs are high, lows are lows. You got to right in the middle. Easier said than done sometimes. I remember this was during the pandemic. I believe it was the end of 2020. My wife was in the process of getting her doctorate. She is a nurse practitioner now. Shouts out Alex. She is an amazing woman for a lot of reasons. As part of her doctorate, we had to travel around a bunch to help her get clinical hours so she could meet the requirements of her graduation. And I remember we were staying in a Holiday Inn in Laredo, Texas. This is when I was building out the account management team at Rev. Just myself. I was managing over 200 accounts, a book of about like $15 million worth of business, and it was just me. And I had never been an account manager before. I had never managed an account manager before. And I felt really isolated because I was in a Holiday Inn Express in this little border town trying to go through my first batch of renewals, and I had no idea what I was doing. And I found myself in like a really like emotional, like upset state where I was stacking my problems on top of each other rather than laying them out. And I remember calling my CRO at the time. His name was Wade Burgess. I called Wade, and he picks up the phone, and this guy knew exactly what to say to me. He was like, I bet right now you're in over your head. You are, or you think you are. everything's manual and nothing scales. And he just cut like right through me. I don't know why it did, but it was like a lightning bolt moment where he said the exact right thing. And I just like kind of turned to mush, and I was like, yes. He said, that's okay. You'll figure it out. He didn't like try to console me or compliment me or say like, oh, it's okay. He's like, no. Like you're gonna get some skin knees along the way, but you're gonna figure it out. I know exactly what I needed to hear. So that was probably the most emotional moment that I've had in my sales career.
That sounds emotional. Sounds very emotional.
Yes.
And what based on that, what would you tell to others? Like what are the best practice, I guess, for I don't know, making sure those problems
Yeah. Yeah. So I think again in sales, the highs are high, the lows are low. Try and ride the middle as best you can. Also, I mean, for me, I knew that I was taking something on that I'd never done before because I wanted to accelerate my learning and my growth curve. And that sounds great until you're actually like doing the thing and you're like, oh my God, I have to
what have I done
now? What have I done? Number one, stay the course. Number two, like reach out to whoever's on your board who you trust, who you can kind of be vulnerable with. I think vulnerability is very much a strength. And so I would encourage people, particularly men, it's harder for us to be vulnerable with one another, particularly with work colleagues or even your boss. Find someone that you trust and don't be afraid to be vulnerable with them. Ask for help. Also, don't forget to celebrate the little wins along the way.
Completely agree. That's great advice.
Yeah.
Fifth and final question. Now, this question was submitted by David Meyer. He's an MD at Clarify. Now, David asks you, what options are you exploring for selling into customers and prospects in a recessionary environment when buying has scaled back and sign-offs have risen? Obviously, this also touches on what we spoke about earlier.
Yeah. So number one, I think if it's using digital body language to get in front of people from a new business perspective, whether that's our marketing or focusing on inbound as well and intent, as well as your key target accounts, like keep the main thing from a new business perspective. I think you also have to turn and pay attention to your customer base a lot. So net revenue retention is something that we're absolutely looking at and figuring out how can we dial up selling into our customer base. Just because with sign-offs rising, it's becoming harder to sell new deals in this environment. You really need to focus on, number one, keeping your core customer base, keeping your GRR up, but then also understanding like how can we gain leverage from a net revenue retention perspective.
Fantastic. Jacob, they are all of the questions that I've got today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was fun.
Is there anything that you would like to leave anyone listening, any final parting words, one thing that you would like to leave everyone listening with?
Yeah. I think for me, like, what I'll leave you with is like, I was not a 16-year-old who woke up one day and said, I want to be a SaaS sales leader when I grow up. Despite what you see on LinkedIn, I don't think those people or those kids exist too often. But sales and sales leadership has been the most rewarding experience of my life from a work perspective. I've gotten sales that allowed me to meet a ton of interesting people, solve really interesting problems, travel the world, and ultimately help achieve my career mission statement, which is to help people learn, grow, and succeed. So I couldn't be more grateful to be where I am. I've got a great team around me with Occupier, and I just feel incredibly lucky and blessed. So if you're thinking about sales, it's a great career path.
Yeah, exactly. And I'd second that on people growing up and wanting to be a SaaS sales seller. It's something you got to grow into. It's something you got to grow into, I think.
Exactly.
If any of you guys listening want any more information, resources, links about Jacob, Occupier, or anything that we discussed in this episode, then there's going to be a few bits and bobs down in the description below. Other than that, thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week. Cheers, Jacob.
Thanks.